Hi everyone, happy Wednesday. Hope you're having a great day. Thanks for tuning in. Just going to chat a little bit today about a little bit more about boundaries, specifically about why we don't look after our boundaries and what a boundary violation might look like, and where those might occur. So lots of people have talked to me about boundaries, and people generally say that they're not very good at having boundaries in place, hence why I've done this blog, and it's a much longer blog and a couple of videos, and running a workshop on boundaries and how to support you to create healthy boundaries in August. So do check that out, or pop a comment in the boxes in the section below this video and I'll come back to you. So why don't you look after your boundaries? If you feel like your boundaries aren't great, why don't you look after them? Well, you ask anybody that you come across and they'll give you 5, 10, 15 different reasons. But there are generally some sort of underlying principles. So the first one, and one of the main ones that I find, is that people are really afraid of conflict. They don't want to speak up because they don't want to have a negative impact on the other person. They don't want to have an argument about it. So if my boundary is that I really don't like social media or mobile phones while we're having dinner, and somebody who I'm having dinner with is on their phone all the time. If I'm out in a restaurant, I might not want to speak up because I might not want to create a scene. But sitting there and not speaking up actually makes me have a really shit evening. And yet I do it anyway. Well, not so much anymore. And people are generally pretty good with social media and mobile phones at dinner. But that might be one example of why you wouldn't speak up, is because you don't want to create a scene. People also aren't very good at protecting their boundaries because we want to people please. We want to make the other person happy. And this is kind of tied up with the fear of conflict. So we may not speak up about our boundaries in a work situation, for instance, because we want our boss to give us a good end of year review on our performance. We want to get a pay rise. We want to keep our job. So we keep our mouths quiet and closed when it comes to our boundaries, and we sit there and stew, and we feel resentful, and we feel overburdened, and we feel stressed. And these are all consequences of not speaking up and not having healthy boundaries in place. We might not speak up about our boundaries because of our self-concept about ourselves. So if we think of ourselves as a generous person, for instance, if somebody asks us to do something, even if it violates a boundary that we have, we might be more likely to do it because we value generosity and we want to be a generous person. And so we say yes when other parts of us are saying that we should say no. So this is a big one to watch, and I think it's important for us to have values and to live those values. It's about how we bring them to life that matters. We might not express our boundaries if there's a power differential at play. So think about relationships like employer-employee, doctor-patient, teacher-student, those kinds of relationships where there's a clear power differential, where one person has a lot more power than the other because they have access to and control of resources that the other person wants. So this could be knowledge, it could be information, it could be access to networks, or hard, formal printed resources, something like that. Power differentials can exist in personal relationships as well. So if you're in a relationship with somebody, if you have a friendship with somebody and they're more educated than you are, or they have a higher income than you do, or they have more knowledge in a certain area than you do, these sorts of differences can create power differentials. So in those circumstances, if we're the person with what we perceive as less power, we might be less likely to speak up. We also might not speak up about our boundaries because of what we perceive as political requirements, cultural requirements, or social norms. So think of terms like political correctness, and that's something that's really vocalized these days is, oh, we need to be politically correct. We can't say this, that, or the other thing, even if it impinges on our boundaries. So be aware of what you may or may not be saying, what boundaries you may or may not be supporting based on your perception of what is and isn't politically correct or culturally acceptable. So where might boundary violations happen? And I think we need to be really aware of these because while boundary violations can happen in any environment, any context, and in any relationship, there are some places, some relationships where we're more likely to allow our boundaries to be violated. So we sort of talked about a few reasons why we wouldn't speak up and that would result in boundary violations. So this is a little bit of an extension to that. So if we think about personal time and work time, the term work-life balance is something that's been around for a very long time, and I'm not sure that really anybody feels like they have a good work-life balance, or very few people do. Given our current situation where many of us are working from home because of COVID-19, this area is one where boundaries are more likely to be transgressed. So how do we delineate between personal time and work time when we're working at home? We might have a partner there, we might have children there. We don't have a physical proximity, a physical location difference. So once upon a time, we left home and we went to work in an office or a factory or a warehouse or whatever it was. Nowadays, many of us don't have that luxury of working in a different physical location. So that means that there's less delineation between personal and work time. Think about creating friendships across power differentials. So when I was lecturing, I never became friends with my students. When I've been in leadership positions, I've never become friends with the people who reported to me or who were in my team. I've been friendly with them. I've been friendly with my students. I've been empathic and compassionate towards them, but they've not been my friends because that makes the relationships too confusing. So just be really careful around those sorts of relationships where you might have a primary relationship that it might be friendship, and then you might start working together. And if you're fairly equal, that might be okay. But if you're subordinate and superior, that can become more difficult. So just be really careful in those sorts of situations. One I think that's really important that we need to be aware of that often people don't think of when we think of boundary violations is sharing personal information about somebody without their consent. So this could be in a work environment or it could be in a personal environment. So think about a group of friends where maybe there's half a dozen of you and you all know each other and a couple of people catch up on the side from time to time. That's all good and fine. But then one of them takes something to another person that was shared with them in confidence and shares it with somebody else. Now, whether that's in a gossipy way, such as, oh, did you hear what so-and-so did? Or in a compassionate way, oh, I really feel for such and such because they're having a really hard time. Unless the person who shared that information with you has given their consent for you to share it with somebody else, you're violating their boundaries and their privacy, their right to privacy. So just be really careful about that and think about what you share with somebody else that you would be comfortable with them sharing with another person, and then apply that kind of rule to yourself. Boundaries can be violated where we allow ourselves to become doormats. So I spoke a little bit about that yesterday, in that when we have really porous boundaries, we can become kind of a doormat in our relationships with other people where we allow ourselves to be trampled on. So be really careful about where we allow ourselves to be trampled on. And ideally, don't allow yourself to be trampled on. It's probably the best way to go, the healthiest way for you. Being aggressive or attacking others can be a real boundary violation. So if you think about that from an energetic perspective, and when somebody is very aggressive and they're sort of out there and in your face like this and really getting to you, that can feel really, really confronting. And your reaction might be to really pull back and recoil from that. That's a boundary violation. That person is violating, firstly, your personal space, and secondly, your energetic space. And it's okay for you to stand up and say, this behavior is not okay for me. And the final one that I wanted to share where boundary violations can take place is when you actually bring that on yourself and when you really don't have a filter in place, where you share everything about yourself with everyone. Firstly, people are going to get bored with that. They're not going to want to hear everything. It's going to violate some of their boundaries. If you're sharing that with, if you're sharing really personal details with some of your work colleagues or your superiors or your subordinates, that's going to be not okay for at least some of those people. And secondly, it's not respecting yourself. It's not looking after yourself. It's not giving yourself the space that you need to process things on your own. So just be really aware of that one and have a look in where in your life you might be doing that. So that's it for today. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you got something useful out of that. And do remember that I have a workshop on creating beautiful boundaries coming up at the beginning of August. So check into my website on the Your Adventure page, and that information will be up really soon. Or pop a comment in the comment boxes below and I will get back to you. Have a great afternoon, everyone. Thanks for listening. Bye.